Hello, Facebook fans and YouTube fans of DX Engineering. It's Tuesday afternoon here in the Eastern Time Zone of the USA. It's 18:15 Zulu on February 21st, 2023. This is Tuesdays with DX Engineering. And this is a show where we try to feature interesting things about DX Engineering. Not always, sometimes we have other special guests, but today we have a really great guest. It's Rod, K8RR, from the DX Engineering sales and technical team. And Rod, welcome. Great to
Thanks.
have you here. And Rod, you're one of our senior guys. How long have you been with DX Engineering?
Uh, Gosh, I should have had this figured out beforehand. Since 2005, the end of 2005.
So about
So
18 years.
just coming up on 18, yeah, for a solid 17 years
Yeah, yeah.
with DX Engineering, and a lot of helping of a lot of customers, and a lot of learning about DX Engineering products and all the other great products that we carry from a variety of manufacturers.
Right. And Rod, what we want to encourage guys today and gals is to ask questions in the chat room. This is your chance to really ask great questions, whether they be antennas or radio or coax. Um, Rod is very, very knowledgeable about all these things. And, in fact, a guy wanted to know about some balance this morning, and I sent it to Rod. I says, Rod is our guy. He's the guy that knows this stuff. And Rod, how many years did you have at Amateur Electronics Supply before DX?
Yeah, I came. Yeah, that's right. Before I came to DX Engineering, I worked at Amateur Electronic Supply in Wickliffe, Ohio, the Cleveland suburb, and I was there for 9 years.
9 years. So,
So I've got over 25 years of sales and tech experience in the business part of the hobby,
yes.
and I've been licensed since 1974, 74, yeah, a novice in 74. So I'm just a couple of years behind you, Tim.
Yeah, but I'll tell you, Rod, you've answered many more questions for many more customers than I have, and you're a go-to guy for a lot of our sales staff too. If they need help with a question, I mean, there's always an open Teams channel to get to you.
That's right. The sales staff can actually ask me questions on the fly while they're on the phone with a customer. Now that doesn't always work out timing wise if I'm tied up on a project or out back working on an antenna, which I do some of that kind of work too. I do some antenna testing and prototyping, but the communication channels are there. Uh, I just see a comment there from Alex. Thank you very much. Really appreciate that. Um, and my focus, of course, for most of my life, actually, even before ham radio, was I was interested in HF antennas, and so I have just this wellspring of information on HF antennas and radios, and I'm not really much of a FM VHF kind of guy, if you know what I mean.
Right. Well, and fortunately, we have lots of guys on staff that are FM, VHF kinds of guys and digital guys.
Right.
So that works out good. Rod, how about the band conditions? How about the HF conditions?
Oh my goodness. I mean, if somebody didn't know, we've come flying out of the solar cycle minimums, and now there was a huge peak over the weekend that shattered all sorts of records for the solar flux. And so the conditions on HF now, uh, after I had done some contesting work at a local contest station, I came home and did some of my own on Sunday afternoon to close out the end of the contest. And I made contacts, I mean, virtually consecutive contacts. So this is great for DXers as well as contesters, right? There's a lot more stations on during contesting. But the point is that on Sunday afternoon, I made consecutive contacts with Asia and Africa and Europe and South America and New Zealand and Australia. I mean, it's just it was like, and that was on 15 meters. Where and I switched to 10 and I made some more of those kinds of contacts, and then I switched to 20 and I made some more of those kinds of contacts. So at that point, this is unusual, right, Tim? But during this past weekend, the conditions were almost as if the ionosphere was a mirror, and almost anybody with almost any amount of power could be heard by other stations around the world.
Yeah, conditions were really good, and it was sort of unfortunate that when the shot of the solar flux was taken, it was during a flare, which caused there to be an erroneous number reported, well into the 300s, when the real number, once we got to another measurement period, was still really good down in the 165 area, and that.
Right.
And guess what, Rod? We're just getting started.
That's right. That's right.
It's
The peak could come in the next year or two or three. It could be more than one peak, and it could be well up into the 200s or beyond.
right, right. So if you have a question for Rod, put it in the chat room. Before we get to the questions, we want a lot of questions today. But Rod, how about antennas that have limited duty cycles for key down? Do you have an example there, Rod?
Yeah, yeah, that's right. One of the challenges in ham radio for the last couple of years has been the advent of FT8 mode, where people can use a very modest transceiver and a computer program and modest antennas and make some amazing DX contacts with with just not a lot of power, and that's something that I want to start off by kind of reiterating for those who are watching and those who will watch later on. You do not need high power for FT8. It's a low power mode. It works really well at reasonable amounts of power. Anybody with 30 watts, 50 watts, some radios can handle running FT8 at 100 watts, like my relatively new FTDX10 Yaesu can do it. But there are other parts of the entire system that you have, whether it's the coax, the antenna tuner, a switch, a balun, a remote antenna switch relay. There's going to be a number of different components, and especially some antennas cannot take extremely high power on FT8 because it plays like RTTY. It's a very strong, harsh key down mode. And so here's an example of what can happen if you run too much power in FT8. Now, this is not an indictment of this particular antenna, but this is a trap from a Hustler BTV where we have the sleeve and the lower tube and the cap and the upper tube. And this is actually able to be moved for coarse frequency adjustments when you're setting up your BTV. But if you, and I did this purposely to test the theory, right? If you run too much power, you can burn the trap on trapped antennas. They're just not designed to handle full single sideband power. Single sideband PEP, 1500 watts is our legal limit in the U.S. is it's really a very intermittent mode, right? It's not a constant 1500 watt key down like CW if you put a brick on the key. So a lot of components can't handle that, and so there's really no reason to run that way. You can accomplish the same contacts on FT8 with 250 watts or 300. I like to have our techs and our salespeople recommend that you use basically 25% of a full single sideband rating. So let's say, for example, your antenna is rated for 1,000 watts on a PEP single sideband. You should be running really no more than 250 watts on FT8 mode. And this is not common knowledge. I mean, people think that just because the radio has single sideband and that's how you use the software for AFSK modes on WJST-X, that you can run full power, and that's just not the case on on a lot of different situations,
Sure.
depending on the equipment.
So this is really a good tip, is to back down the power so that you don't run into trouble with traps and antenna switches. I mean, I know you've had to troubleshoot with lots of customers that tried to run a little bit too much power, and it's also hard on the amplifiers too, whether it be RTTY or FT8 or FT4. But what I wanted to do, Rod, is I want to go into the chat room now. And again, here's your chance. Ask a question to Rod in the chat room. We've got Michael, young Michael from north of Pittsburgh, W3MLJ is on, and Massimo, our pilot, KF0NZY. And we've got Kilo Golf 2, Mike is on, and nice to have you on. And he was our guest last week. And from South Carolina, it's WA5 Alpha Mike. And Uncle Gunter is on from the Rhine River over in Germany. Delta Kilo 5 Oscar Norway Victor. And Jimmy Cessna, KB8 November, is on. And of course, Rod, you acknowledged Alex, W7 Hotel United. And great guy, very smart. Yes, Rod is. And we've got Alex, Alpha 2 Juliet. And Charlie is on from Missouri, Kilo 0 Lima Alpha Fox. And also from Oregon, it's Whiskey 6 Bravo Juliet Radio. And question, Kilo Golf 2 Mike, what would be a good balcony mount HF antenna for an apartment? It would be located 20 stories up in a building.
That has got to be one of the toughest ham radio situations, because if the balcony itself is surrounded by a metal frame for screens or windows, then that's going to impede and the RF, and you're going to have issues with tuning an antenna. Sometimes, in some of those situations, let's see. In some of those situations, if the balcony is deep enough, you could put down a plate or some kind of mount and use some type of ham stick. Some of the balcony railings, if they're open enough, if you have enough clearance from the balcony railing to the balcony above, for example, you might be able to put some type of antenna on the balcony railing if it's metal, and use the metal of the railing as a counterpoise. There are some small loop antennas that can work in those situations, and one of them, like the Stealth from Ciro Mazzoni, might be able to be used on a metal table or on a support with a metal sheet or screen underneath it. But it's a trial and error situation, without a doubt. I can't say, get this one, it'll work for you, because RF doesn't behave that way in such a restricted environment with the chance of metal in the structure or around the balcony. It's a catch can type.
Right. So scenario. you have to be willing to experiment and try some things. I know we've had guys that would use a Hustler mobile antenna and then have a quarter wavelength of wire that was stretched out like on the balcony as the counterpoise.
That's right.
So maybe on 20 meters, you would have something about, 16 or 17 feet of wire hooked as a counterpoise against the Hustler vertical. But you're right, there is no simple answer. And
Yeah, sometimes guys can get away with like shooting a wire out over a tree if there's one out there,
yep, yep,
or hanging a counterpoise wire down off the balcony. But then, that is the end of that is going to be at high voltage, and potentially somebody could touch it and
yeah,
get an RF burn. So you got to be real careful with that kind of thing.
got to be careful. Buzz asked, what is the easiest and cheapest way to connect a nice studio microphone that requires phantom power, so bias power, to a Kenwood TS590SG?
That's a real good question, and it's not necessarily simple, because it's going to take some piece of equipment that we may not actually have at DX Engineering. We're going to be bringing in a new piece of equipment from a new supplier, Metro Power. It's going to be an 8-band EQ. That's going to have a method of allowing you to connect an external supply and put that into a microphone. There are different audio devices and EQs and things that can do that, but that's not been an item that DX Engineering has focused on in
Right,
the past.
Buzz, I would recommend too that you look at the Heil Sound website, because they do both ends. They do, the commercial guys and they do the ham radio guys. And if anybody has, got a transformer or a wiring, they have lots of different wiring diagrams for different radios. So I would check there as well. KDV, Dave is on with us, Rod, and he says, hello, Tim and Rod. Of course, Dave is part of the DX Engineering sales team, and nice to have you on, Dave. I have yet to find a question Rod was unable to help me out on. His help is always appreciated. And
Thanks.
Kyle wants to know, what antenna were you using for 10 meters?
I have a Kellerman trap wire dipole that covers 20, 15, and 10 meters, and it's hung from a tree limb in the inverted V fashion. So the center coax connection is at the top, and then the legs come down at a 90-degree angle or 45-degree from vertical, and that feed point is up, I think, around 35 or 40 feet. So it would be sort of like having a rotatable dipole up on a short tower, but I was running 100 watts. So that'll give you an idea of how good the conditions were over the weekend. I don't know if that's held up today, but or yet yesterday, somewhat yesterday, but maybe not today. I'm not sure.
And we've got Tim on November Lima 7 Delta, and Gary Kilo 8 Delta, Kilo Bravo 0 Delta Radio Sierra. And Bob, WD8NVN, he worked Bouvet on 20 meters and Crozet on 3 bands with FT8. So congratulations, Bob. And Drew is on November 2 Oscar or Alpha Kilo Juliet. And Mark is on from London, England. This is Mike 0 Delta X-Ray Radio, K8RR operator. Good evening from London. Has everyone recovered from the outstanding contest conditions last weekend? And they were amazing. Bring more of that on.
Yeah, still tired.
We also have Barry on from England, Germany 6 Juliet Mike X-Ray, and our friend Juan, Tango Golf 9 Alpha Juliet Radio is on. And let's see. King says, my Diamond SWR meter I ordered in 2021 was supposed to ship last month. Will it eventually come? that is a problem that started occurring in early 2020 when the supply chain and COVID and everything. And there are back orders that we have had for years.
That's right.
And we may never, ever get those SKUs again.
There are going to be a few things that have to be redone because the parts for the old version are no longer available. But a lot of those things will come back into stock eventually. We're just, waiting for components. The manufacturer's waiting for components, and then of course there's the backlog or the delays in
right.
Ocean shipping.
So, Rod, if you could make a note to follow up with Kilo Zero Delta Uniform Charlie, K0DUC is the one asking about the Diamond SWR meter. Maybe there's another SWR meter that we do have in stock that will work for him. And so let's have a conversation. From the Faroe Islands, here's some good DX, Rod. Oscar Yankee 1, Oscar Fox. And Tom is on, November 4 Tango Victor from Tennessee. And let's see here. Who else do we have? Drew says, how about a mag loop? A lot of guys have had good experiences with some of those mag loops, Rod. Typically you can't run a lot of power, but that's okay. It gets on the air.
That's right. The magnetic loops, like some brands that there's a lot of different brands out there. I mentioned the Cyril Mazzoni Stealth. That's just one, example of a magnetic loop. They're not as sensitive to their surroundings. So in a close quarter situation like that balcony we were talking about, the mag loop will possibly tune more easily or not be as adversely affected by the surrounding metal.
Right. Also, Kyle is on Kilo Charlie 1 Sierra Delta Radio from Rhode Island, and Ken Victor Echo 7 Bravo Charlie, and from Germany it's Sandy Delta Lima 1 Quebec.
Hi, Sandy.
Is on as well. Well, Rod, you have helped so many people, and if you didn't get a chance to ask your question today, you can always call DX Engineering and ask for Rod, K8RR. It's real easy to remember. K8 Rod, K8 Radio, K8 Radio Rod. They all work.
Yeah.
And he's very accessible. He's been doing a lot of our research and development work. Just finished up a lot of work on the new revised hex beam. And we're so fortunate to have Rod on the DX Engineering staff. And we want to thank all of you today for watching. And we hope maybe you learned something. And we want to encourage you to come back and watch the next edition of DX Engineering live shows. Until then, 73 from DX Engineering.